Hey guys, Jake Carlson here, host of the Modern Leadership Podcast. Are you ready to focus on amplifying your leadership superpowers? Let's go! Good morning, my friends and fellow elite achievers. Welcome to Modern Leadership, the podcast where each week we sit down with authors, entrepreneurs, and leaders to explore their journey, diving into the ups, their downs, and ultimately the lessons they learned along the way. Our goal, of course, is to show that everything is figure-outable. Today's guest expert is Malorie Nicole. Malorie is not your typical entrepreneurial and executive coach. She certainly isn't what you picture when you hear subconscious reprogramming specialist. Boy, that's a mouthful. She has a keen awareness of the exact things blocking people from their next level of success and fulfillment. As you know, today, most driven professionals and business owners find themselves in overwhelm. As we fight to reach our goals, Malorie helps entrepreneurs, executives, and driven professionals decrease stress, lead their teams more efficiently with her neuroscience-based process. She's also the host of the Abundantly Clear podcast. Not that I've been abundantly clear today. Today, she is our modern leadership guest expert. Malorie, welcome to the show. How are you?
Hey, I'm so good. Thank you for asking and thank you for having me on.
How about the irony of Abundantly Clear podcast that I can't even get out?
I love it. It's actually kind of ironic.
Tell us about the podcast. What's your goal?
My goal with the podcast and my goal when I'm on other people's shows too is just to really continue to spread the message that there are subconscious things that show up in our life. And when we address those things, it changes our entire experience because we cannot change our circumstances, but we can change the way that we react and respond and show up to things with our resilience. And I just really want to keep sharing that.
Well, and this deals with this subconscious reprogramming specialist that you are, and that's a mouthful. Tell us a little bit about what that means. Break it down for us in terms that we can understand.
Yeah. So what I basically do is I help people heal and remove the blocks that they're not aware of. And a really easy way to explain this is, if you hurt your arm, you break your arm, you're very aware that you've broken your arm, right? You can feel it, you can see it, you know that you need to go to the doctor. Well, a lot of times when it comes to mindset blocks, we're not even aware of the things that are blocking us. Maybe we feel that something needs to change, or we know that something needs to shift, but we don't really know why, how, or what is going on. So I help people really remove those blocks that are perpetuating patterns in their day-to-day business and life, creating the stress, overwhelm, or income caps, or whatever it is that they're experiencing in their business. I kind of take them back and do the old work that's affecting the present day current situation.
And I want to take you back a little bit to your sales process, kind of how you get engaged with these coaching clients, because you and I are both believers that we all have these subconscious blocks, and there's things that we can get over and eliminate in our lives that will propel us towards success. But if it's something that we don't know about, and let's say you're on a sales call, and right now you're on this podcast and you've got listeners that probably need your coaching. They need your help overcoming some of these obstacles. But if they don't know that they need it, how do you communicate? How do you help them identify that, yes, hiring you is the next best step?
Yeah, it's such a fantastic question, and honestly took me a little while to figure out. And at this point, I've kind of dialed in a handful of very specific things that business owners struggle with that I know are mindset blocks. And I'll give you an example. I had a first call with somebody today who was looking for some help. And when we got on the call, we spent about 20 minutes talking about this block he kept experiencing in his business. It just wasn't moving and going the way that he wanted it to go. The marketing wasn't taking off. He wasn't making the money that he wanted to make. And I feel a responsibility to make sure and dial in, like, is this a marketing problem? Because if it's a marketing problem, you need a marketing coach and you need to dial that in. With this person, the more we uncovered what was really going on, there was a huge pattern of perfectionism. So what was kind of happening with his business is he was he was recreating things on a weekly basis, preventing and stopping him for really launching and getting this thing off the ground going. Because as far as his mind was concerned, it was never going to be good enough. So it didn't matter what kind of marketing he added to it. He already knew what he needed to do. That's a very big sign of a mindset block. You already know what you need to do, but you're not doing it. And that's just one example. Not everybody deals with perfectionism, but that's one example of knowing, all right, you actually don't have a marketing problem. You have a mindset block of really allowing yourself to show up to your full potential. So we need to address that.
And I think that I struggle from this. I have this perfectionism mindset block. And as you were talking through this experience with this coaching prospect, I was thinking of a lot of our podcast guests nodding their head along with me and you, saying, yes, I see this, I feel this. Do you find that some of these mindset problems, like in this case, this perfectionism, does it manifest itself in other areas of the business that are more measurable? So you said this guy came to you and said, I'm having a hard time getting my marketing going, or I'm not making the kind of money. But that's really not the cause. That's the effect. The cause is really this mindset. Do you find that happening?
Yeah, absolutely. Productivity is a really good place to start, looking at how much time are you spending and what are you actually getting done. And sometimes that's just not knowing what you need to be doing. But we have a tendency to self-sabotage, ourselves in our productivity. And a lot of that comes from mindset stuff. And what we're talking about right now also plays into other areas of our life. So with him kind of sharing that, it was really easy for me to then go into, so how often are you using your voice? And what does this look like in your relationship at home? And what does this look like in other areas and jobs that you've had? Have you experienced that you have had caps of not getting promoted or not speaking up and addressing conflict? At this point, I've just had thousands of conversations with people, and it's very easy for me to dissect and know, okay, this is what's going on. This is the problem. This is what needs to be addressed so that it can shift, because it's never just affecting our business. And 9 times out of 10, it's not something that's happened in the last few weeks or few months. If we look at the timeline, it's something that has shown up over and over and over again in our life, and we've normalized it and we don't realize really what's going on.
Now, when you're working with someone like this individual, and the reason that I keep kind of going deeper and deeper with this particular instance is because just right now in my business, I'm facing a similar kind of dilemma where I have recreated a sales landing page 3 times in the last, let's say, 45 days. And every time I've recreated it, it's gotten better. Like, I love it a little bit better. It's never quite perfect, but how do I know when a product or a service or an offering and marketing piece, how do I know if I'm being stopped by perfectionism or if this is just what needs to happen, the evolution of my business to get better and create better? Like, we're now at the iPhone 11, right? If they would have stopped at the iPhone 1, we wouldn't have all the great stuff of the iPhone 11. But where's the balance between creating and changing for the sake of being a perfectionist and creating and changing for the sake of actually making the product better?
Yeah, and that's a great question, because we're always going to be changing things, especially as entrepreneurs, with our creativity and our problem-solving natural abilities. There will be a part of us that wants to continue to tweak. But when it's annoying us, if we are annoying ourselves, that's a good indicator. But also, is it preventing or stopping you being you or anybody else listening to this? Is it preventing or stopping you from showing up? So is it sitting on a tab on your computer, you're recreating it, tweaking it, and not actually launching it?
So there's a big difference between launching something, seeing how it performs in the marketplace, and then tweaking it versus creating something, leaving it on your desktop, and then going in and changing it without any evidence that what you created initially needs to be changed.
Right. Exactly. And I find that when people are really honest with themselves, we all have a gut instinct. Call it intuition, gut instinct, general feeling, whatever the word is, it really doesn't matter. We know if we really ask ourselves, we can usually identify is this a mindset thing or is this normal?
Well, this is a really interesting thought process, right? Because let's say my gut tells me, Jake, this is a mindset thing. You're really struggling with it. How do I stop myself from procrastinating solving that? How do I create this proactivity in my life to go after solving the mindset stuff?
Yeah, and that's where really this work is such an important role. And it doesn't have to be me, it could be anybody that can, help you do that work. Because what is happening when you're getting stuck in sabotage is you're actually stuck in brain loops. So this thinking and feeling loop is showing up over and over and over again, preventing you from moving forward. So it's really the concept of deprogramming. And we'll go back to this example again, because we're kind of talking about perfectionism. And that's exactly what came up on the call today with this person. I had asked him, what has your mindset growth personal development journey looked like? And his response is, well, I've read a ton of books and I have a ton of notes on all the books and there's so much I need to implement. And, I'm just continuing to try and learn and learn and learn. And that's fantastic. But part of really getting in and doing the subconscious work is actually deprogramming. It's not adding on. It's not doing more and more and more. It's removing the conditioned thought and belief that's stopping you from showing up in your full potential right now, today.
So how do we do that? Because as you were going down that kind of description, I'm thinking of a lot of people that I've coached and a lot of people that I've worked with that have spent years studying all the great motivational works and listening to cassettes and CDs and now podcasts. How do we start to deconstruct some of this stuff and start to really work on what needs to be worked on?
We really need to understand where our beliefs start. So most of this stuff really is programmed in our childhood. And I know there are a lot of listeners out there that are going to listen to this and go, no, I don't need to address the stuff in my childhood. Or no, I don't want to address the stuff in my childhood. And it's not about reliving the past. That is far from the truth. But until we understand why we believe what we believe about ourselves and about the world, until we really have clarity on that, we cannot create new beliefs that work for us.
And how do you walk the line between therapist and coach? Because somewhat, delving into our past and why our beliefs and that foundation sounds like the work of a therapist. Where does a coach differ?
Yeah, that's a great question. And in therapy, there's a lot of rules and regulations and laws around therapy and working through and processing emotions. And therapy is more about the here and now current thing that you're feeling. And it serves a really great purpose. But coaching is very different. Coaching is about moving forward. Coaching is about looking at what the belief system is. And if you really get into the laws and the practices of it, you're not allowed to act as a coach in a therapist's office because there's a lot of laws and protections around PTSD and just protecting people and triggering, emotions and stuff like that. Coaching is a totally different set of questions, angles, framework. It's completely different as far as what the line is there. Think of coaching more as pulling out the root to move forward, not just how are you feeling about what's going on.
As you're digging down to that root, though, aren't you uncovering some stuff that probably needs to be dealt with professionally?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So that's just part of the journey that people go on.
Yes.
Well, over the years, as you've grown in your coaching and in your reputation, have you seen a shift in the reception of coaching from the early days when maybe it was not as looked forward to, or not as, I don't say if it's cool to be coached versus nowadays where it seems to be more mainstream accepted? Have you seen any changes over the years?
I don't know if I've been around quite long enough to see any massive changes in that, but I will say in my own line of work, I get I do attract a lot of people that are willing and able to raise their hands and just say, I know that I'm doing this and I'm ready to shift whatever it is that needs to be shifted. I don't know how to do it. That's why I'm asking for help, and I'm willing to ask for help to do it. And part of that honestly might be my name is out there more than it was when I first started, and I have just a bigger network of people. I don't know if that's just that my business has grown, or that's the feedback and the receptivity that I'm receiving from people on the other end. I'm not sure.
Or what your subconscious is telling yourself?
Yeah, or that.
Let's shift gears just a little bit because I want to talk about stress. And in some of your materials, you talk about this stress epidemic. And that word epidemic is such a large word as far as it's loaded. And I want to ask you about this stress epidemic and what you see and maybe what we can do to work through it.
Absolutely. Stress, especially in the entrepreneurial field too. I feel like it's one of those things where there's a lot of silent sufferers out there. There's a lot of people with a lot of established businesses and, maybe on paper things look good, or maybe in their branding it looks great and people from afar think they have everything figured out. But internally, they're just not happy. And there's a part of them that's even afraid to admit that because they have built something. At least this is what I see often because I have a tendency to work with business owners. They have built something and they're just not that excited about it anymore. And they don't want to admit it. So the stress epidemic that I feel like really needs to be addressed is understanding where this comes from. So much of stress is not the circumstance. Like we were kind of talking about before, it's not the circumstance that you're in. It's the beliefs around yourself and how you're perceiving things that is creating the stress. So two people could be experiencing the same exact thing and have the same exact life, which we know that never happens, but just hypothetically speaking, two people could have the same exact life. One person could be stressed to the max and the other person could be experiencing it with ease and joy. And what's the difference between those people? It's their mind and how they're looking at it.
Well, let's jump in and as an example to a business owner. And you mentioned you're working with a business owner who maybe isn't as passionate anymore about their product or service or their business. And they keep going day to day, probably because they're pretty fully invested in it. And this is wearing on them. It's stressing them out. This is causing this epidemic that we talk about. Where do we start as business owners if we find ourselves in this position where we're just not happy with our work?
Yeah, and I end up helping a lot of people in transitional periods because that is there's such a potential to be super stuck in that place. And the first thing that I would want to know for anybody in that position is, what are you telling yourself right now that you can't do? And that might sound a little weird, but there are a lot of people that I have worked with that have built multi-million-dollar businesses and they're not happy and they don't want to do it anymore. And the story they're telling themselves is, I can't actually do what I want to be doing because I've built this thing. So then we have to look at, well, what are all the stories connected to the thing that you want to be doing? Why do you think that thing doesn't have the potential to be successful? And what is it about this, next adventure that you want to go on? Where is the scarcity in that? Where is the scarcity in what lack of potential that thing that you want to do has?
And this, what you're talking about, doesn't apply just to business owners. I can see a lot of listeners of the podcast that are in middle management or they're even just starting out in their career. And maybe they don't own the business, but they do own their job in that they don't like what they're doing today, or they're just not as passionate as they used to be. And everything that we're talking about, everything that you just said, can apply to them as well, can it not?
Absolutely. And there's really two areas of the career part that I want to touch on, because I'm glad that you brought that up. You might actually not like your job. You might not like a whole lot of anything. And if you're not liking a whole lot of anything, you're definitely not liking your job. So just identifying, is this like a whole well-rounded thing, or is this actually my job? Do I just not like the people that I'm working with? Because if that's the case, there's some mental shifts that can be had there to where you can experience the people you're around differently. If you know that you really don't like your job, like you go to bed every night thinking, if only there was another job for me, then yeah, you really want to ask yourself, why do I believe that there's nothing else possible for me out there? Why do I believe that it ends here? Because all that is a dead end thought. You have given your thoughts a dead end that nothing else is possible. And that's why you're staying stuck.
And one of the things that we talk a lot about on this podcast is that we are whole individuals. So when we struggle at home, it manifests itself at work. And when we struggle at work, it manifests itself at home. You can't just shut it off when you walk out of the office or walk into the home. And what you're saying is, just because you could be going through some challenges in life. Maybe you're having marital trouble, or maybe you have a kid that's gone in a direction that you're not pleased with, or is having health struggles, and that could be impacting your work. But because we spend so much time at work, we often associate the feelings that we're having with, oh, I just don't like what I'm doing at work. And what you're saying is it could be a number of different factors that kind of weave together to create this overall feeling or sense within your life of unhappiness, stress, or concern.
And in addition to that, I'll give a personal example on this. It could be that you have a really great life, but you have a negative outlook on it. And that's something that I struggled with. I did not realize for a long time that I was kind of, quote unquote, wishing my life away. I had this kind of thought that was playing out in my head. And it started with something like this. If only insert blank. If only I had, if only I was, if only things were different, if only XYZ. There was nothing about my life that really was wrong, but my outlook on the way that I was showing up to the world and the way that I was experiencing things really needed to be healed, deeply needed to be healed, because that was creating this negative energy and this negative feeling that I was bringing into my life.
And one of our heroes on the podcast, Zig Ziglar, he always talks about, or he used to talk about, the when-then game. When we play the when-then game, when I get the raise, then I'll be happy. Or when I get the big house, then I'll be able to relax a little bit or put my feet up. Or when my company hits $1 million, then. The when-then game puts us on a continual path chasing that elusive butterfly of happiness. And what I hear you saying is that we really need to focus on the journey. We need to focus on where we're at today. And I want to ask you a little bit about how we start to have this gratitude. We've talked on the podcast about gratitude journals. How do we identify all the great things that are going on in our life and bring those to the forefront so we don't fall into this trap of wishing our life away?
Yeah, and identifying the great things is incredibly important. But to be honest with you, I think that isn't even what I needed at the time. So I'm just thinking about the listeners, and if you might be where I was, I really needed to understand where my negative voices came from. Because by removing I'm not saying that I never have a negative voice. I'm human, just like anybody else is. But by really removing and healing some of those things, it allowed me to start seeing through a different lens.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what's the journey that you go on to start to discover those? I mean, do you need to hire a coach, or are there some exercises we can do on our own that'll help us to start to identify some of the root causes of our thinking?
That's a great question. I personally wasn't able to do it on my own. And I've never been able to create a course. There might be other people out there that have. I've never been able to create a course that gives the same type of results that working one-on-one does in really having someone facilitate that space. So that's a question that I get stuck on sometimes, because if I'm being completely honest, I'm not sure that it's a one-person job. And I don't think I'm the only person on the planet that does it. I certainly know that I'm not. But if we could have done it ourselves, we would have done it already. That's just kind of how I look at it. It would have been something that we've already shifted in our consciousness to be able to create a different state of being. But some questions that you can start asking yourself is you can start getting really honest with, why do I think the way that I think? And what are my patterns? Because a lot of times we don't even know what our patterns are. And until we can identify what our patterns are and how they show up, that's really where it starts. We need to know what these patterns look like to be able to take it a couple steps back.
And I completely agree with you. I happen to be in the same camp as you, that this is something that you need to work with somebody else, a coach or a professional or somebody in your life that can help take you through this process, these steps by yourself. And I'll give one additional reason than what you said, and that is the energy. And we believe a lot in energy and the vibrations of the universe and, abundance and scarcity and mindset and all of that. And one of the things that I believe is energy comes when you start adding multiple people together. When you have two people working towards a common goal, 1 + 1 equals more than 2. And that's why I would agree with you 100% that we need to focus and get the help and the mentorship, the coaching that we need. That's why Both myself and Malorie do this, and that's why this has been such a great conversation. Alas, Malorie, it's time that we shift gears just slightly and head to the final section of our podcast, the Learning from Leaders. Are you ready?
Absolutely.
All right. Our first question in this section is, what is the book that you're currently reading?
I am currently reading MetaHuman, Unleashing Your Full Potential by Deepak Chopra.
We love Deepak, and I love that title because it really goes along with your intro. I mean, you just love these big, like kind of metaphysical words, and it's just been fun to talk with you. Our second question is, what is your leadership superpower?
My leadership superpower is really helping people show up in leadership positions from the inside out.
And why is it so important that people show up inside out?
Because that's where our true, authentic self lies. And when we remove all of this conditioned stuff that just gets tacked on and tacked on and tacked on, I believe that that's when we're really living in our full potential.
And I think when you're living in your full potential, that's when the real joy in the journey comes, when you really are vibrating at that authentic self. So I love that. How about a motivational quote, philosophy, or mantra?
It changes. I love this question, and I always get stuck on it. I don't often get stuck on questions, but this question always stumps me. I don't have a mantra that I go by every single day. I do have a note on my phone, and the note on my phone, it shows up twice a day, and it says, leaders lead. That's all it says. And it reminds me that I am living on this planet, not just having my own experience, but that everybody else around me matters too. And how I show up has a direct reflection in that.
Leaders lead. I love that. Thank you for sharing. What a terrific motivational quote that you use daily. And I think a lot of us could really use that kind of motivational pep talk in our lives. Our final question then is the book that you most often gift or refer to friends, family, and colleagues.
I absolutely love giving business owners, especially ones that are in leadership positions and in career. If you're in a leadership position or in your career, it's called Leadership and Self-Deception. I think it's a fantastic read.
I haven't heard of it. Tell us a little bit about what we can expect when we pick up a copy.
Yeah, it is all about the inner work of leadership. You know, we have a tendency to think about leadership as, well, how can I better communicate and how can I be more productive? And this book is really kind of encompassing a lot of the things that we're talking about. And why do I show up the way that I show up? And how can I be more aware of myself? Because that's really the thing that leadership is.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I love that. Malorie, it's been so much fun hanging out with you today. Before we let you go, how can our listeners find out more about you and connect?
Yeah, they can find me at abundantlyclearpodcast.com. Feel free to shoot me a message if any of this resonated with you, or you can go over to iTunes, Spotify, any major podcast platform and listen to the show.
Awesome. We'll link that up on the show notes. Before we let you go, any last bit of advice?
I think that it would just be great to, as you're listening to this, just remember that we are all so much more alike than it may seem. And no matter how stuck you feel, it's probably just an illusion. So give yourself a chance to just know that change is super possible. I do not believe in the concepts of that we are the way we are and that it's not possible to change. I think we all are super capable of our own growth.
You are awesome. Thank you for coming on the show and being this week's Modern Leadership guest expert.
Thank you for having me.
All right, my friends, and a big thank you to Malorie for coming on the podcast and talking about something that's near and dear to my heart, and that is this mindset. We've really got to get our minds in the right place before we can get our businesses in the right place. And that's why I've spent so many years coaching. That's why Malorie coaches, because we really see the potential that you have as a business owner to take your business to the next level. Of course, everything that we talked about on this episode of the podcast and every episode of the podcast can be found at jakeacarlson.com/ML175, episode 175. And until next week, I want to wish you the very best of days, an even better life. And remember, with coaching, everything is figure-outable. Thanks for listening to the Modern Leadership Podcast. You can find me on Facebook at Speaker Jake, on Twitter at Jake A. Carlson, and of course the website, jakeacarlson.com. See you there.